Hi, my name is Kathleen Starr, and I'm here to welcome you to the FKCE Training Institute. I can't be here with you in person because I'm on vacation, but my thoughts are with you, and I'm really excited about this training that you're attending. Specifically, I wanted to talk with you about best practices for working with LGBTQ youth in foster care. I work for the Department of Family and Children's Services in Santa Clara County. I've been there for, I hate to say this, but almost 20 years. I've also worked as a social worker, case carrying worker, and I have, for the last 10 years, I have been a foster care social work supervisor. I've also spent approximately 10 years working as the co-chair for our GLBTQU employee committee, where we work really hard to advocate for the interests of youth who identify as LGBTQ. It seems weird to use the acronym, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, and queer youth. I've also, in the last 2.5 years, been the chair for our county for the Putting Pride into Practice project. It's a very exciting project. It's a 3-year grant that our county got. We are unique. There are approximately 4 counties in the state that got the P4, we call it P4 grant. Putting Pride into Practice is a privately funded project, and the goal of that project is to improve outcomes for GLBTQ youth in foster care. In Santa Clara County, what we've been doing specifically is working on training all of our social workers, as well as training foster parents and care providers to better meet the needs of kids in care who identify as GLBTQ. Let's see, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is kind of a current trend in this area. We've always talked about GLBTQ and used the acronym, but we're starting to trend towards also using a new expression, SOGIE, which is S-O-G-I-E, and what that stands for is sexual orientation and gender identity expression. And the idea is, rather than treating this group of kids as a unique population that stands alone, separate from other kids, in fact, everyone who identifies as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, as well as youth who have different gender expressions, that in fact we're all part of a larger continuum that all of society exists on. That there is a continuum of sexual orientation. The old Kinsey scale used to say that Kinsey did his research in the 60s, and he created a scale on a scale of kind of 1 to 10. 10 being people who identify as extremely heterosexual and 0 extremely homosexual, and then everyone else kind of exists somewhere in between along a spectrum, more commonly called bisexual, but that there's a continuum that we all exist on. Same thing with gender identity, that some people identify strongly with their biological gender, that I was born female and I identify strongly as female, and so my identity as a female person is consistent with my biology. But there are also people, youth and adults, who have gender identity that is not consistent with their biological sexual gender. And so there's and we see a wide range of people who identify along that spectrum of gender identity. That there are some people who might take hormones to make their bodies more consistent with their psychological identity of gender. So I'll touch a little bit upon that later in this video, but I encourage you to learn more about it. It's kind of an exciting field where there's a lot of research being done, but it's interesting that we're also finding a lot of youth in foster care who are identifying as transgendered, and it's important to address this population. So one of the important things that I like to keep in mind when talking about working with LGBTQ youth is sometimes people think of this population as a population that has special needs or that they need to be treated differently. And in fact, I like to remind people that LGBTQ youth are exactly the same as any other youth in foster care. They have all the same issues, same needs, same desires, the need to express themselves. Some of the kids are going to be really good academically and really just want to go to school, and other kids are going to act out. And the LGBTQ youth are no different than all other youth. And yet we need to have these special trainings to talk about their issues, not because they have special needs, but because society treats them differently. And I think it's an important distinction to make that these kids do not have special needs because they're GLBTQ youth, but rather they have special needs because of the way society sees them and treats them, the way their families might view them, the way their church might treat them, the way their schools might perceive them, the way other youth are treating them at school. And it's because of the way society treats these kids that as caretakers and us as trainers need to be sensitive to how these youth are perceived and how to work with them, not because they're special, but because of the way society treats them. I think that's an important distinction to make. The foundation for these kinds of trainings and the foundation for the work that we're doing today is kind of rooted in really blatant discrimination. There was a lawsuit filed in Morgan Hill here in the Bay Area, South Bay Area, back in 1998. There were a group of teenagers that were in the local high school, and they were being mistreated by other kids. They were being bullied and verbally harassed, and there was kind of a pattern of abuse and mistreatment. Those kids had been telling their teachers and their principal and their parents about the mistreatment, but nobody really actively did anything to protect those kids. And eventually, those kids' parents, working with NCLR, National Committee for Lesbian Rights, and HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, they filed a lawsuit against the school district. And at that time, AB 537 was drafted, recognizing the importance of and the responsibility of schools and teachers and staff at the school to protect children and youth. When they report that they're being abused, mistreated, harassed, that there's a responsibility for any adult to respond to that. So that kind of naturally grew into AB 458, which required all foster care staff, social workers, foster parents, any group home provider also to recognize the needs of GLBTQ youth, that when these youth report any kind of verbal harassment, mistreatment, physical abuse, that it's our obligation now under law to respond to that. But also important is the training that backs that up. And now we have AB 1856, which kind of just reiterates what those two laws have already mandated us to do. So one of the things that I refer back to is some really extraordinary research that's coming out of San Francisco. Kathleen Ryan is our local researcher. She's now working at a national level doing a lot of different kinds of work. One study that she did is called the Family Acceptance Project, and I encourage you to seek out more information about that on the internet. It's exciting work that she's doing, and one of the things that her work is telling us, and this really applies to foster parents as well as biological parents, is that what happens at home is really probably the most important thing in the lives of these youth. So we know anecdotally that GLBTQ youth are at higher risk of different behaviors, and Kathleen Ryan's research really demonstrates that the relationship is between accepting behaviors in the home versus non-accepting behaviors in the home. And this obviously applies to foster parents as much as biological parents. That if parents are accepting of their child, that the child is going to be much more well-grounded and have a much more successful future and feel accepted by their family. If there's rejecting behaviors in the home, and I'll detail in a minute what those behaviors are, if there are rejecting behaviors in the home, the youth is at a much higher risk of, for instance, illegal drug use. That we know that that when there's a low level of rejection or rejecting behaviors, that the child is much less likely to engage in illegal drug use. However, if the rejection is more moderate, there's a greater incidence of rejecting behaviors, then that youth is at a higher rate or higher risk of illegal drug use. And then obviously if the family engages in a lot of rejecting behaviors, or what we call high rejecting behaviors, then the rate of drug use increases almost 400%. The same thing is true of the risk of HIV infection. In homes where the parents have low occurrence of rejecting behaviors, the child may be at risk for HIV infection, but obviously the risk of HIV infection increases when we move to moderate, and then obviously when the rejecting behaviors increase and they're very high, then the child's risk of developing HIV infection later in life increases dramatically. And probably some of the most frequently cited statistics in research are related to suicide attempts and suicide completion. That we know that in homes where children are accepted by their parents and there's a low occurrence of rejecting behaviors, the children are much less likely later in life to attempt suicide. However, when it's a moderate rate of rejecting behaviors, it increases. But the most dramatic, what Caitlin Ryan's research shows us is that in homes where there's a high occurrence of rejecting behaviors, and I don't know the numbers, but if you check out the research, you'll see that there's a dramatic relationship between rejecting behaviors in the home and the likelihood of that child to later in life go ahead and attempt suicide. Just briefly, I'll share with you what some of those behaviors are. When we talk about rejecting behaviors, is it okay if I just read like this? When we talk about rejecting behaviors, what we're talking about specifically is hitting, slapping, or physically hitting a child, and blaming their LGBT status. Also verbal harassment or name calling because of a child's LGBT status. Excluding the GLBT youth from family and family activities. Blocking access to their friends who also might identify as GLBT. Also excluding them from events and resources that are specifically designed for GLBT youth. Blaming the child when they are discriminated against because of their LGBT status. Pressuring your child to be more or less masculine or feminine. Telling your child that God will punish them because they are gay. Telling your child that you are ashamed of them or that they should be ashamed of their behavior, and making the child keep their LGBT identity or status a family secret and not letting anyone talk about it. So these are specific behaviors, and this is all part of Caitlin Ryan's research, specific, concrete behaviors that you can train foster parents about, what to avoid doing, and then I'll give you a list of what are considered accepting behaviors. One of the interesting things about her research, too, is not only does she detail the rejecting behaviors, but she advises that it's obviously parents are not always going to be thrilled to find out that their child identifies as GLBT. That's just human nature. But to encourage them that just by avoiding these behaviors, they may not change their mind or change their feelings about their child identifying as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, or transgendered. But by simply refraining from some of these behaviors, we see the dramatic improvement in outcomes for these youth. On the converse side, if they want to show accepting behaviors, what accepting behaviors look like are to talk with your child or foster child about their LGBT identity. Express affection when your child talks with you and tells you about their identity. Support your child's LGBT identity even though you may be uncomfortable. Advocate for your child when he or she is mistreated because of their LGBT identity. Require that other family members respect your child's LGBT status. Bring your child to LGBT organizations and or events. Connect your child with an LGBT adult role model to show them options for their future. Welcome your child's LGBT friends and partners to your home. Be supportive of your child's gender expression, and believe that your child can have a positive future as an LGBT person.